This is part 2 of our Lesson 1 video with the American Revolution. In the first part of the video, we talked about Fort Ticonderoga and the successful attack there to gain equipment and artillery for the British who were surrounding Boston, as well as we talked about the Battle of Bunker Hill. In this portion of the video, we're going to focus on getting those weapons from Ticonderoga to Boston. We're going to talk a little bit about Common Sense, a pamphlet that was issued by Thomas Paine, and finally we'll talk about declaring independence. Let's start off with Henry Knox. You can see him in this picture here. He's going to be one of Washington's right-hand guys. In fact, he's going to be put in charge eventually of all of the artillery for the Continental Army. Prior to joining the war, Knox owned a bookstore in Boston. Again, not a military guy by trade, but he had read a lot of books about military, so I guess that made him qualified in the American Army. In the winter of 1775 and 1776, Knox was charged with transporting the weapons captured at Ticonderoga in New York to the Continental Army that was located just outside of Charleston. Over the course of 3 winter months, Knox was able to move the more than 60 tons of cannon and other armaments by boat, horse, and ox-drawn sledges and manpower. Now, the roads that he was taking them across were very poor quality roads. Even compared to our roads in Pennsylvania, these were poor quality roads. That says something. Across 2 semi-frozen rivers and through forests and swamps of the Berkshires in the Boston area. Or to the Boston area, excuse me. Several historians commented on Knox's adventure, and one claiming that it was one of the most stupendous feats of logistics in the entire American Revolutionary War, how he got those weapons there in 10 weeks. Knox, we know a lot of details about Knox's journey because he kept pretty detailed journals for that 10-week trip across New York. Once Knox arrives in Boston, they place the weapons kind of on the outskirts of Boston, pointing at the Charleston Harbor and pointing at the city of Boston. And it won't be too long before General Howe, the commander-in-chief of the British forces, sees those weapons and realizes that he's kind of been outmaneuvered. He is going to load up his armies from Boston and move them to Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is in Canada, and there he will regroup. That's going to happen in kind of late January of 1776. At that time, that's when Knox is appointed the Chief Artillery Officer of the Continental Army. As Knox is moving that equipment and it's getting into place and the British are moving out, we have the contribution of the fellow that's here on this page, Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine was a English philosopher who had come to the United States in come to America, in 1775, and traveled around, and he became very interested in the movement to declare independence. During this time, in the winter of 1775-1776, he begins to publish this small book, a pamphlet, a 48-page document that describes why it makes sense for the people who live in America, in the 13 colonies, to declare their independence. In fact, he says it's really quite silly to expect England to govern the colonies, with England being a small island and the colonies being as large as they are, this landmass that is, largely unexplored. He believes that doesn't make sense. He says that England can't effectively govern the colonies because they are separated by the enormous Atlantic Ocean. And he makes these arguments that the colonies should be free of British rule. The way that he does this is as important than anything. He doesn't write this document for scholars He doesn't write it for the learned men of the time. He writes it for the common folk, and he writes it in a style that the common people will that they'll understand, and something that is very accessible to them. It's more like a sermon. In fact, he uses biblical references in order to make his case to the people. Now, within the first couple months of this document being published, it was published in Philadelphia, over 120,000 copies of the document sold. By the time we get to the end of the first year, they sell close to 1 million copies of this. Now, whenever we look at that and compare it to the population, if all things in relative proportion to the population of the colonies at the time, it becomes the largest sale and circulation of any book published in American history. So you can even think of the books that we have today that are prominent books, our Harry Potter books and our Hunger Games that have sold tens of millions of copies. They don't compare proportionately to the population. About 50% of the population read Common Sense within that first year. And that is an outstanding number. It was very, very influential, convincing people to join the Continental Army, convincing people to financially support the Continental Army, and eventually support the cause of independence. John Adams said that without the pen of the author of Common Sense, the sword of Washington would have been raised in vain, that this was every bit as important as having Washington and his army, was having this document to encourage people to declare our independence. One last note about Common Sense. Thomas Paine, the author of it, he gave away the rights, the royalties from this document being published. He donated all of the royalties to Washington's Continental Army. After this document was published, a lot of people decided, people who were sitting on the fence for independence, they went over and supported independence. People who were solidly against independence, they were more willing to listen to it. So in June of 1776, a motion is put forth in front of the Second Continental Congress that the colonies should be free and independent of England, and that we should create a document that says as much. There's a committee that is put together to write the said document, a committee of 5, but for us, there's really only a few of those people that are important. We want to know that on that committee was Thomas Jefferson, again a Virginian, because you have to have the Virginians on your side if you're going to declare independence from Great Britain. Benjamin Franklin, who is by far and away the most famous man in America, and one of the most famous men in the world at that time, and John Adams. Thomas Jefferson is going to write the framework of the document, almost the entire document, and Adams and Franklin will both make some amendments to his initial document before it is sent to the Continental Congress. That will happen from early June until the very beginning of July. On July 2nd, the Declaration of Independence is read before the Continental Congress, and July 4th it is voted on and it is passed. Everybody begins signing that document, and over the next 2 or 3 months, by August, the end of August or early September, the entire document has been signed by the delegates of the Second Continental Congress. It goes into effect, and the war has now taken on a new cause. It's not just protecting ourselves from the British, it is fighting the British off and having our own country. That pretty much wraps up Lesson 1 in the American Revolution series.